My name is Emery Vance, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy, or at least I was. The rank doesn't mean much anymore. The uniforms are faded, the protocols burned out of us somewhere between Havana and Charleston. But I still wear the patch, still say the title, still salute the empty chair in the wardroom when I pass it. Because some part of the structure still matters, even if we're the last ones following it. This is day 372. We've been afloat nearly the entire time, minus the 3 weeks in Key West for a dry patch and replacement filters. We're running off reserve diesel, 1 turbine cold, reactor offline permanently. We've got power in 3 decks, gravity-fed water only, and we've been rationing rations. That's what we call it now, rationing the rations. The USS Mason Ridge was a modified Arleigh Burke class destroyer hull number Delta Delta Gulf 902, built in Bathmine over 2 decades ago. She had the Aegis combat system, vertical launch systems, and the Phalanx close-in weapon system. The whole works. Now half the consoles are black. Combat systems are inert. 1 Delta radar dome still spins, but there's nothing left in the sky to track but storms and seagulls. When the outbreak hit, we were docked at Naval Station Norfolk, scheduled to depart at 600 hours on a maritime patrol rotation. The plan was to hit the Eastern Atlantic corridor, then slip through the Strait of Gibraltar for joint ops in ROA. That plan died the same day the president's emergency alert flickered out mid-broadcast. Communications collapsed within 72 hours. I still remember the last time I heard Stratcom. It was a pre-recorded loop of a male voice repeating continuity of government under active preservation protocols, and then static. That same static hums in my left ear like a ghost every night. Commander Hale kept the ship docked for 2 days, waiting for orders. He followed the book page by page while Norfolk fell apart in real time. People were clawing up the gates outside the pier, screaming, bleeding. Bodies twisted in ways you don't forget. Families of our own crew trying to get in. Some made it, some didn't. I watched Petty Officer Samuels climb the north fence with his wife, cradled on his back like a child. She was already infected. He knew it. It didn't matter. He just wanted her aboard for one last night. She turned on the Mystic 20 hours later. We lost 3 people that day. That was our first lesson. This ship wasn't a sanctuary. It wasn't a fortress. It was a pressure cooker with too many desperate souls and no exit plan. By week 3, Hale gave the order. No more civilians. We'd patrol the coast, rescue who we could, but we wouldn't dock anywhere more than once. The Mason Ridge became a lifeboat for those already aboard, and nothing more. There were 110 souls on board when the ship left Norfolk. 47 are still alive. 34 of them are fit for duty. The rest are too young, too old, or too injured. I run a Navy destroyer with a skeleton crew that includes 2 teenagers, a retired sonar technician who uses a cane, and a 10-year-old who helps grow tomatoes in the aft hydroponics bay we made from torpedo racks. I wasn't supposed to be in charge. I was the assistant captain. Hale was the spine. Sharp, principled by the book, but fair. I never expected him to snap. But 6 months in, after the Key West incident, he took a bottle of Macallan from the ship's gift locker, sealed himself in his quarters, and never came out. I was the one who had to open that door. I still see it sometimes. The sliver of light on the floor, the empty glass, his boots neatly arranged, a note torn from the bridge log. All it said was, "It's not ours to save." I never shared the note with anyone. After the hail, I didn't claim the captain's cabin. I still sleep in the junior officer's quarters. But everyone looks at me now. I write the logs, set the duty shifts, decide when we anchor, when we search, when we take the risk. I sign the rationing slips, decide who eats what and when. I hate it, but I do it because we're still afloat. We've made it by being mobile. We stay near the coast, but never too close. At night, we drift with lights out, engines cold, solar backups only. It makes us harder to detect by the infected or the living. Don't get me wrong, there are still people out there, but not all of them want help. Not all of them deserve it. We learned that lesson in Savannah. We dropped anchor near Hutchinson Island last December, spotted signal fires on shore. I sent a 4-man recon team in one of the Zodiac boats. When they returned, only 2 made it back. The others were taken, stripped of gear, left behind, and the signal fired. A trap. People out there were using distress calls like bait. Now we only go ashore when we know the place is cold. Abandoned waterfront towns, grounded container ships, derelict ports. We found a working crane in Port Canaveral last month and loaded 6 crates of MREs from a FEMA train car someone had driven right into a loading bay. Half the crew cried when we opened the last one and found chocolate pudding cups. That was a good day. Other days, not so good. We pulled into a beached cruise liner 3 weeks ago north of Palm Coast. We needed meds, painkillers, antiseptics, anything. Found a pharmacy on the upper deck, still locked. But what we didn't see until it was too late were the infected inside. Cabin crew, passengers, a wedding party. Judging by the decorations, it was like opening a tomb. They came at us like a wave. Too fast, too many. One of the kids, Ramon, tried to help a fallen foreman up the stairs. He didn't make it out. We had to pull out full speed. I ordered the ship to shell the hull of the cruise liner afterward. I told the others it was to collapse the decks, make sure nothing got out. But it wasn't about safety. It was anger, guilt. We don't talk about that mission anymore. The ship can now more than it used to. She's old, overworked, but she's still alive. Like us, barely. The desalination plant's been limping for a month. Thermal energy intake keeps fluctuating, and the water tanks smell like rust. Engineering is short-staffed. We've cannibalized every spare pump, belt, and fuse from both the mess systems and after cooling. This morning, I spent an hour on my knees in the BGE trying to clear out a fuel filter with a fork. The kids don't understand what the world used to be. Mason, our youngest, still thinks the net is something we pull fish in with. He was 6 when this started. Now he's got a little station on the port deck where he sorts bolts by size and draws sea creatures on scrap metal. I asked him once if he remembered what a McDonald's was. He said, "It's a boat, right?" Sometimes I wonder if that's for the better. Yesterday something changed. I was rotating through the radio deck. Standard scans, just background static. The HF rig we rigged with a wind-up alternator still works barely. I flipped through every long-wave band, the usual dry buzz and empty bursts of solar noise. Then I heard it faint, not voice, not music, but pattern. 4 short pulses, a pause, 3 long, another pause, then it repeated. Morse code, SOS. I thought it was bleeding over from an old relay station, maybe Miami. But the signal strength shifted, almost rhythmic, the kind of bounce you get with a real origin. It repeated 6 times, then cut out. I noted the time, marked it on the log, and I stayed up all night scanning. At 05:20 this morning, it came again, this time followed by coordinates 4 times. Clearer, Caribbean sector, northern Park near San Andreas, south of Cuba, east of Nicaragua. A narrow band of sea we haven't dared sail through since month 5. Too close to pirate waters. Too many rumors of old U.S. vessels sunk there when the warships ran out of chain of command and started shooting at everything. But the message is real. It's repeating every 6 hours now. Same pattern, same voice, automated, yes, but someone set it up and someone is keeping it powered. Tomorrow, I'll bring it to the crew. They'll want to know what it means, whether it's a trap, whether it's worth risking our last tanks of fuel for a broadcast that might be 10 days old. But deep down, I already know what I'm going to do. 1 year ago, my brother was stationed on the USCGC Stratton, working counter-smuggling ops off the coast of Central America. His last message came through encrypted SATCOM just 4 days after Norfolk fell. 5 words: going dark, heading south, try for San Andreas. We were never the kind of brothers who said things we didn't mean. I never told him I loved him. He never told me he looked up to me. But we'd spent years passing unspoken truths across long deployments and family funerals. That last message stuck with me, not just because of what it said, but because he sent it at all. If Devin said try for San Andreas, it wasn't a guess. It was a direction. A final move on the board before the world flipped over. I brought it to the wardroom the next morning just before sunrise. Of the 34 able crew, 27 showed up. The rest were either off shift or guarding the lower decks. I laid out the paper chart on the table, an old hydrographic survey map, pre-outbreak, laminated and fading. I circled the coordinates we pulled from the broadcast. Then I stepped back and let the silence carry weight. Senior Chief Mora was the first to speak. She always was, asked if we had fuel for it. I told her yes, barely. If we cut power to the off generator and coasted through the Yucatan Current, we could reach San Andreas in 10 days, maybe 12 if the wind turned. She asked the real question without asking if it was worth it. I had no proof, just instinct, and a voice on a loop. Lieutenant Pennywell, our comms officer, asked to run a full signal analysis. I let him. He came back 2 hours later with signal triangulation logs from the last 3 sweeps. Same origin point, slightly shifting frequency, indicating a manual reset somewhere. That meant human hands and recent ones. We voted by nod, not because it was official, but because some things still needed to feel agreed upon. Every single one of them nodded, even Taylor, who hadn't spoken since the cruise ship op. She just gave a slow, tired nod and kept her arms folded. She didn't need to believe in San Andreas. She just needed a new heading. We pulled anchor an hour before noon. I gave the helm to Chief Berm, who'd been a diesel mechanic before joining the Navy and could coax life out of steel with nothing but a wrench and prayer. He plotted a southwest heading that skirted the Florida Keys and pushed us into the Florida Straits, running parallel with the Gulf Stream. We wouldn't have enough power to punch against it later, so we had to let the ocean do the work. We passed the rusted wreck of the Carnival Azure late that afternoon. It was half sunken off the coast of Marathon Key, listing to port with lifeboats still hanging untouched. Through binoculars, I saw streaks of black ash trailing from the upper decks and salt-bleached flags fluttering with cruise line logos. Pennywell said the ship had gone down early, February, maybe. The company had denied the outbreak was spreading on board until passengers started turning in the spas. The Coast Guard refused to board. Then someone lit the whole upper half on fire. No one knows if it was mercy or containment. We didn't get closer. No need to. The first 2 days of the voyage went smoothly. The sea was calm and the wind was consistent. We ran with minimal lighting, just enough for deck navigation. The flank systems were powered down to conserve battery, and we posted watches in rotating 4-hour shifts. We had 2 working drones, short-range recon units we'd patched together from parts salvaged off a downed NOAA research boat 6 months ago. Pennywell launched one just after sunset on day 2. It gave us eyes 50 nautical miles ahead, but we lost video intermittently. The broadcast interference was heavier than usual. It was near Cuba's western edge when we picked up the first signs of trouble. Not infected, something else. We intercepted a local broadcast, Spanish garbled AM frequency, the kind used by ham operators before the fall. It was a repeating message from a boat that claimed to be stranded off the Isla de la Juventud. The man gave his name, Rafael Ortega, said he had survivors on board, and said he had fuel. He repeated his plea 3 times, then silence. Burr wanted to alter course and try to find them. Mora advised against it. Too far off track, too shallow for our size. I told them both I'd decide by morning. I didn't sleep that night. I stood on the bridge alone for hours, listening to the sea slap against the hull in a rhythm I've memorized after a year of floating. I thought about Ortega, thought about San Andreas, thought about the chance of finding either. I pulled up the ship's last known fuel log. If Ortega really had tanks intact, even half full, we could extend our reach. But if it was a trap, another one of those shore setups meant to bait desperate vessels, we'd be dead in the water, literally. By sunrise, I'd made the call. We would investigate, but we'd send a recon team first, not the Mason Ridge, 1 Zodiac boat, 4 crew, quick sweep, no engagement. If it looked clean, we'd make contact. If not, we'd return and resume the course. I picked the team myself. Mora, because she never flinched. Pennywell for radio support. Sergeant Cal Becca, a former Marine who joined our crew when his amphib unit was overrun in Tampa. And Corporal Jim Sung, youngest aboard, but quick as hell. They launched with 20 L of fuel, 2 radios, and orders to return by dusk. I watched them go through the scope, their boat cutting a clean wake through the green-blue chop, the kind of image that would have made for Navy recruiting posters once upon a time. Now, it just looked like 4 good people vanishing into unknown waters. They returned 7 hours later, running quietly. No survivors, no Rafael Ortega. The boat was real. An old converted fishing tower ran aground on coral, half submerged with signs of struggle inside. Blood, bullet casings, a child's toy melted in the sun. The message had been looped from a makeshift solar-powered repeater mounted to the deck roof. Whoever had set it up was long gone. Or worse. We didn't speak much at dinner. Later that night, I sat with Mora on the flight deck, looking out over the dark water. We had the red deck lights on, the ones that don't carry too far. She asked me if I still believed in San Andreas. I told her I had to. She didn't press, just handed me a protein bar and nodded. In this world, belief isn't about certainty. It's about direction. On day 5, the ocean changed. The currents became erratic. Wind shifted southeast. Swells picked up just past Jamaica's western tip, and we started getting pushback from the weather. Storms formed quickly in the Gulf. These days, no satellites, no forecasts, just instinct and whatever we could read from barometers and sky color. We hit the edge of a squall around midnight. The Mason Ridge bucked hard in 6-foot waves, and the aft solar rig tore loose. We lost half a dozen plants from the hydroponics bay, and the auxiliary comms antenna sheared clean off its mount. Becca fractured his wrist trying to secure the emergency generator. We rode it out for 9 hours with the engines off, letting the sea carry us in whatever direction it pleased. By morning, the storm had passed, but the sky stayed gray, thick with moisture, and quiet as a tomb. The sea was flat, too flat, like it was waiting. We took stock, repaired what we could. I stitched Becca's wrist with what was left of our medical sutures, then sent him below with 2 painkillers and a bottle of canned mango juice. He smiled through the pain and said the mango made it better. I envied him, that kind of resilience. Most of mine was routine now. Checklists, logs, daily walkthroughs. It wasn't courage, it was a habit. Day 6, we saw lights. 3 faint dots to the southeast, moving slowly across the horizon just before dusk. Too slow for aircraft, too controlled for flare drift. Pennywell grabbed the long-range lens and tracked them. 3 vessels moving in convoy formation. One looked military, or had once been. The hull was marked and dull. No flag, no identifiers. The others looked civilian, modified fishing vessels maybe, or patrol boats with topside mounts. We powered down everything except passive radar and ran silent. No lights, no signals, just dark metal floating over darker water. They passed within 10 nautical miles, never changing course. No radio hails, no gestures, just shadows on the sea. Pirates, survivors, another floating fleet like the one we'd heard rumors about out of Panama. We never found out. I ordered no pursuit. We held a course. And then this morning, something changed again. The signal from San Andreas came back, stronger, clearer. A female voice now. American mid-30s, calm, repeating a simple message. Port security, civilian safe zone, refugees accepted, dock channel 3, frequency 6290 kHz. She gave coordinates that matched what we already had. Then the voice paused and repeated. It looped 6 times before fading. Pennywell confirmed the frequency was clean. No interference, no bleeding. Mora looked at me across the wardrobe. No nod this time, just expectation. That's what leadership becomes after long enough. Less about giving orders and more about answering the silence. I didn't need a vote this time. Not one person spoke when I laid out the new heading. Everyone had already made their decision. Either they believed the voice was real or they needed to believe it. I gave the order before sunset. Full propulsion, limited lighting, silent comms outside of encrypted short-range bursts. We would reach San Andreas in 4 days if the turbines held. The Mason Ridge groaned as we increased speed. The hull hadn't pushed this hard in months. Old, pipes rattled, bolts clattered loose. Becker and Son took turns tightening valve seals while lying flat on their backs in the crawl space under the reactor room, navigating by headlamp. and feel. One of the portside turbine dampeners seized up the second day in. We had to shut the whole system down, strip it bare, and replace it with parts from the backup seawater pump. The thing wasn't designed to run hot for this long, but Berm worked miracles with a crowbar and a can of lithium grease. The man spoke to engines like they were people. Maybe after all this time, they listened back. By the evening of day 2, the horizon shifted. The water turned pale green. Currents got tricky. Flying fish started bouncing off the bow like skipping stones. And the air changed. Humid, but not dead. The kind of air you feel right before landfall. The smell of growth, wet wood, the faint sour rot of abandoned docks. It triggered something instinctual in all of us. We were close. The Mason Ridge could feel it too. At 0500 on the third morning, we caught our first visual contact. A cluster of rigged pontoons floating like scaffolding in the fog. At first, we thought it was a wreck. Then Pennywell dialed in the scope and saw people, at least 2 figures walking along the top beams, armed, cautious, scanning the water with binoculars. They moved like sentries, organized, intentional. Someone had built something out here, and it was holding. We powered down the main engines and let drift carry us in slowly. Our draft was too deep to push right up to the island's interior docks, if they even still existed. The reef systems around San Andreas are shallow and uneven, especially on the eastern approach. Berm rerouted our course along the southern reef arc, aiming for what used to be the naval pier at Hooker Bight. The charts were a decade old, but we prayed the bottom hadn't shifted too badly. At 1,000 peninos, we sent up the last working drone. The aerial feed confirmed what we couldn't believe. There was a settlement floating just offshore, built from a sprawling patchwork of salvaged tankers, shipping containers, oil rig fragments, and stripped naval scaffolding. Solar panels lined the roofs in neat rows. Rain barrels and desalination rigs flanked the platforms. Smoke rose from controlled fire pits in metal drums, and radio antennas poked skyward like spines. It looked like a machine cobbled together by desperate hands, but it worked and it was alive. We transmitted on the channel the voice had given 60 to 90 Hz. No encryption, no code, just the name of our ship and our status. This is Lieutenant Commander Emery Vance of the USS Mason Ridge, requesting permission to dock. Non-hostile, low on fuel, requesting aid. Over. I repeated it every 10 minutes. No reply came for the first hour. Then, just as we began preparations to launch a recon raft, the radio lit up. A woman's voice, the same one as the loop, calm, measured, gave her name, Ali Reese, civilian lead of the San Andreas Collective, former communications officer for NOAA before the collapse. She welcomed us in, but with conditions, weapons secured, crew capped at 20 ashore at any one time, and any landing party to submit to quarantine screening. We accepted. 3 hours later, I stepped onto solid metal for the first time in 187 days. The floating platform felt like a puzzle built from memory. Steel plates from different hulls welded together at uneven seams. Cargo containers stacked and repurposed into clinics, dorms, and mesh holes. Thick netting stretched overhead to shade the walkways. It was rough, but functional. Functional in the way survival has to be when everything collapses. Aliyah met us at the edge of the main landing zone. Mid-30s and darkened skin, tied-back hair stray that never stopped scanning. She wore a faded orange windbreaker with the NOAA patch still stitched to the sleeve. Around her neck, a laminated ID badge that no longer meant anything, but she still wore it. We all held on to symbols, even when the system behind them was long dead. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Led us straight to a converted container where a young Haitian medic named Dario performed basic screenings. No blood draws, just pulse checks, breath analysis, and a new tech I'd never seen before. A handheld thermal scanner tuned to detect the early-stage neurological spike the infected exhibited in the pre-turn phase. It beeped once at Becca, who looked like he might rip it in half, before Dario calmly explained that old scar tissue could cause false readings. Becca passed on the second sweep. They cleared all 6 of us: Maura, Pennywell, Becca, S, myself, and McKay, who I brought as a second systems tech. Then Aaliyah gave us the tour. They called it Bastion, not the island, the platform. San Andre's property had been overrun 9 months earlier. The initial quarantine failed when a supply boat from Cartagena docked without inspection by the time the local authorities realized it was too late. Most of the civilian population either fled inland or died in place. But a handful of port engineers, Coast Guard technicians, and marine biologists escaped to the southern piers, then into the wreckage of a half-skein oil transfer station. From that skeleton, they built Bastion piece by piece over months. It housed over 200 survivors now. Roughly half were original locals. The rest came from ships that wandered too far, planes that ditched offshore, or rafts that washed up half dead. They maintained a strict intake policy. No one came aboard without screening. No exceptions. They'd seen what even a one-term survivor could do in a closed system. What struck me most was how normal some of it felt. Children laughed in makeshift courtyards where steel drums had been painted with cartoons. A woman baked bread over a modified heat duct using scavenged flour. 2 men taught navigation with a chalkboard and star charts. There was order here, not military, but something older, tribal, community-born, earned by doing. People wore different colored cloth strips on their arms to indicate role: blue for engineers, green for food staff, yellow for medics, red for defense. They had power, water, communication, and they had maps. So many maps in a container they called the nav. Walls were plastered with updated nautical charts marked in grease pencil, routes, sightings, known pirate zones, flare signals, a collective archive of a world most of us thought gone. That's when I saw it. A red dot circled twice in marker off the coast of Nicaragua. Stratton, a name scrolled below in tight handwriting. My breath caught, not from emotion, but from the sudden shift. Proof, maybe. Aaliyah noticed. "That's one of yours?" she asked. I nodded. She explained it had passed Bastion's outer range 9 months ago. No contact, no docking attempt, just visual confirmation from a lookout tower at dawn. The ship kept to the horizon, moving southwest. Coast Guard white hull, not military gray. Lights dimmed. 2 visible crew on deck, but no answer to hails. My brother could have been one of them. Back aboard the Mason Ridge that night, I stood in the comms room long after the others had gone to rack. I played the old SATCOM recording of Devin's message again. Low, almost whisper quiet, as if lowering the volume would help me hear something I missed. Same 5 words, same static. It wasn't closure, but it was something. We stayed docked at Bastion for 3 days. They shared supplies cautiously, but generously. We gave them 2 barrels of clean diesel and a box of replacement filters from our engineering stores. They gave us citrus, rice, and a water purification kit made from drone battery cells. It was like old-world diplomacy, measured in calories and volts. I met with their advisory circle on the final evening. 6 people, including Aliyah. No one wore rank, no one interrupted. They asked about our route, about our observations. I told them what I knew. Pirate convoys in the Gulf, decoy broadcasts in the Keys, whispers of a rogue Chinese destroyer still active off the Galapagos. They shared their own news. A suspected CDC lab still operational in Panama City. An oil rig turned radar base off Cartagena. A floating signal tower in the Lesser Antilles repeating classified Navy codes on loop. There were still threads out there, still stories in motion. I asked if they'd take in more of my crew. They hesitated, said yes, but only in stages. Integration took time. Trust took longer. I understood. I wouldn't leave them all anyway. Some would follow me. Some needed to. Mora was one of them. She came to me the night before departure and said nothing at first, just handed me her patch. I looked at it. The senior chief insignia weathered at the edges. She said she was staying. Bastion needed organization, someone to teach the next wave how to keep things moving without breaking. I nodded. She left the patch with me anyway, a kind of transfer of weight. We departed on the 4th day just before sunrise. Not everyone came. 11 stayed behind. 23 came back aboard. A smaller crew, but a focused one. The Mason Ridge felt different underfoot, lighter, not physically. Her weight hadn't changed much, but in the atmosphere, the long tension that had settled into the ship over the past year was no longer the dominant current in the air. We had seen something work, something built by hands, not just to hide from the end, but to live past it. That had changed people. You could see it in how McKay moved, less guarded, or in how S volunteered for night watch without even being asked. People who had spent a year drifting were finally starting to point themselves forward. We charted a new course south-southwest, hugging the Western Caribbean arc. The goal was to trail the old Coast Guard vector reported by Bastion's watchtower. If the Stratton had indeed passed along that route 9 months ago, there might still be something to follow. Wreckage, transmissions, survivors. It was a thin lead, but it was the first one I'd had in a year that didn't come from static or dreams. We plotted the heading through a region that before the fall was full of trans-shipping lanes and supply stations. Now it was marked on our grease pencil charts as Zone C, dead drift. It earned the name for the way the currents there moved slowly but unpredictably, pushing abandoned vessels around like toys. Aliyah had warned us before we left that it was also one of the last areas where they'd spotted what she called ghost flotillas. Vessels that never hailed back, never took a course, never showed crew. Sometimes they'd pass by quietly. Sometimes they'd follow. On the first night, the sea gave us calm water and starless skies. A heavy cloud ceiling blanketed the horizon, thick and low, leaving the ocean with no moon to catch, just black on black. We ran lights off as usual, letting the old gyros and thermal currents guide us. The main propulsion stayed at minimum output to preserve fuel. Pennywell slept in the comms chair, wrapped in an old fire blanket, headphones still on. It looked uncomfortable, but no one disturbed him. He hadn't left that chair more than once since Bastion. Day 2 brought rain, not a storm, just the kind of endless soaking drizzle that seeps into every loose seal and swollen bulkhead gasket. McKay and Son spent the day running cables up the forward mast to patch in a new wind sensor unit. We salvaged from Bastion's scrap pile. I didn't have the heart to tell them it probably wouldn't hold, but I let them try. The act of repairing something, anything, meant more than the result. It was late afternoon when Becker, posted as a lookout on the port deck, spotted the shape. A large vessel, adrift, maybe 5 nautical miles out. No power, no visible wake. From the size and outline, it looked commercial, maybe a cargo transport or an old cruise liner. He logged it and called it in. I took the scope. The hull was stored with corrosion, but something about the way it sat on the water felt wrong. We approached with engines cut to a whisper. The closer we got, the more details emerged. The name was mostly scoured off the bow, but we could make out parts of the registry. It was a Panamanian-flagged livestock carrier. La Esperanza II. The upper pens were rusted open. No signs of movement, no noise, but along the starboard side, hundreds of dark smudges lined the railing. From a distance, it looked like barnacle buildup. Through binoculars, you could see they were handprints. Dozens, maybe more, some still wet. I made the call to back off. We didn't board. We'd seen enough abandoned ships to know the pattern. When you see fresh prints and no fire damage, it means someone or something is still aboard. And whatever kept those handprints from drying wasn't something I wanted to investigate. The Mason Ridge turned slowly back to our plotted course, engines humming low, the carrier fading into the haze behind us. That night, I met Pennywell in the forward comms bay. He'd picked up something unusual, an old Coast Guard identification ping on VHF channel 16. Just a call sign. November 5034, Charlie, the Strattons. It had bounced off an old repeater buoy somewhere north of the Mosquito case, distorted and faint. The timestamp said it had been transmitted 3 days ago. If that was real, it meant the Stratton was still active, still moving, still trying. I didn't allow myself to hope. Not fully, but I marked the position. I drew a circle around the zone and adjusted our heading. New coordinates, direct route to the Mosquito case. The third day tested our patience. The seas turned choppy around midday. A rogue current pushed us off course by 10 degrees, and we had to burn more fuel than planned just to regain drift control. The swells slammed into the port hull with a deeper rattling groan that echoed through the ventilation shafts. A fuel line in the starboard auxiliary room burst under pressure. Becca and McKay sealed it with an old medical tourniquet and duct tape. It worked for now. I took my first watch that night. We were entering the caves, and navigation would be manual from here. Too many reefs, too little depth. The electronic charts we had were outdated, and the radar kept throwing false positives from floating debris. So I stood up on the bridge, maps spread wide, compass and flashlight in hand. Berm joined me halfway through, silent as ever, mug of powdered coffee in hand. We didn't speak much, just nodded now and then as we called out headings. The stars had broken through the cloud cover, and I used Orion's belt to confirm the angle of our turn. And that's when we saw the light. A single flash, white, steady, then gone, dead ahead, through the black silhouette of mangrove roots and low mist. Not a flare, not a fire, just a beam, like a ship's signal. I locked onto it and ordered full stop. We coasted our momentum into a narrow channel between the quays. 10 minutes later, the light came again. Steady, white, Morse pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS, but nothing followed. No reply on the radio. No sound but wind and water slapping at mangroves. I sent a Zodiac ahead. Becca, McKay, and Pennywell. Just a recon sweep. They left at Era 1:30 and returned an hour later. They'd found the signal source, a rigged floodlight mounted on a fiberglass dinghy, floating and anchored in the center of the channel. No crew, no markings. The battery was running low. The whole thing had been automated to repeat a loop every 20 minutes. Another decoy. It was what they found beside it that chilled us. Tied to the anchor line, half submerged, was a raft covered in dried seaweed. On it, a single boot. U.S. military issue. Same brand the Coast Guard used. Inside the raft, pinned under a waterlogged backpack, was a laminated card, Devin's name. It wasn't an ID, it wasn't even official. Just a maintenance log tag with his name and service number scribbled on it, probably tied to his personal gear. And yet there it was, half folded, stained, and stuck to plastic, like someone wanted it found, or someone left it behind and didn't get the chance to return. I held it for a long time in the wardroom after the others went to rest. I didn't speak, just sat at the table, looking at the card, wondering if it had been in his hand when he tied off that raft, wondering if he was watching us from the tree line, wondering if he was already gone. I don't remember sleeping. At dawn, we pressed on. The caves gave way to the open sea again by midday. We moved slowly, carefully. The reefs here were sharp and shallow. We hit driftwood at least twice and once had to reverse engines to avoid a sandbar that came out of nowhere. The crew was running hot and quiet. Everyone had heard about the card. No one spoke of it, but I could feel them watching me more, waiting for direction, waiting for something to hold on to. I found myself looking for lights every few minutes. Every swell of seafoam became a possible hull. Every sound on the radar, a signature. And somewhere in my head, I started counting again, counting how many days since the last known signal, how far a vessel could drift, how long someone could survive with dwindling supplies. By day 6 after Bastion, we entered the lower arc of the Nicaraguan basin, roughly 80 nautical miles from where the repeater pinged the Stratton's coal sign. The water here was deeper, colder, and deceptively calm. It felt like something beneath the surface was holding its breath. We ran full passive systems. No sonar pings, no radio hails, just slow, quiet navigation with thermal optics and eyes on every deck. McKay rotated through engineering checks, while Becker, now with a splined wrist from the earlier storm repair, handled perimeter watch with Sun. Pennywell had locked himself in the comms bay. He barely ate, just logged every frequency pulse, every squawk, every pattern that even remotely resembled a Coast Guard ID. I visited him once mid-shift, brought him dried fruit and a half cup of Bastion tea. He looked up with eyes like coiled wires and said, "They're close. I can feel it." Then went back to listening. I didn't argue. I could feel it too. By mid-afternoon, the horizon to the south showed a small black line, vertical, unmoving, a mast. Through binoculars, we confirmed it. A patrol cutter, white hull, radar array intact, but visibly battered. No running lights, no wake, no signal. We approached from the east, keeping the sun behind us. The whole number came into view slowly, like a name scratched into a tombstone. WMSL-752, the Stratton. She was afloat, but barely. The starboard side had taken visible damage, likely from collision or gunfire. One of the lifeboat davits was missing, and the stern deck was scorched black, as if there had been a fire. The radio mast was intact, but drooping, cables frayed and tangled in the wind. Still, she floated, motionless in the calm swell, like she'd been waiting. I gave the boarding order. Becca, Sung, Pennywell, and I took the Zodiac around to her port side and boarded near the secondary access ladder. The metal was slick with algae and scorch stained in patches, but stable. The hatch wasn't locked. It creaked open with a long groan that echoed like a warning. The interior smelled like old rotten salt. Not fresh death, just long, unwashed metal. A ship left too long in isolation. We moved slowly, flashlights off, letting the ambient gray light guide us. No movement, no sound. The main passageway was intact, though stripped. Bunks were empty, lockers pried open, personal effects scattered. We passed a galley with cans still stacked in the corner, and a rusted coffee machine knocked on its side. Then a flight of stairs downward towards CIC. That's when we heard the first noise. A knock, not sharp, dull, repeating. I signaled to halt. Becca took the lead, sweeping his flashlight slowly as we descended. The sound grew louder, steady, rhythmic. Down 2 decks near the engineering bay, we found it. A man alone sitting on the floor against a bulkhead, banging a wrench lightly against the wall in intervals of 3. He didn't look up, just kept tapping. We approached slowly. His uniform was faded, stained, and rank unrecognizable. His eyes were open but glazed, fixed on something we couldn't see. When I crouched in front of him, he didn't flinch, just whispered, "Don't go below. They're still down there." Finch had sealed the engineering ladder well with a welded hatch. The infected were penned after being unable to reach him. We didn't go below. Pennywell took his name, Chief Petty Officer Darrell Finch. According to the duty roster taped to the wall nearby, he'd been engineering lead. No others were listed. We asked how long he'd been alone. He blinked slowly and said, "Since the night the lights went out. Maybe longer." We asked about Devon. He stared at us blankly, then slowly pointed toward the CIC, said the captain left a message before he went, below. Said to pass it along if help came. Then he handed me a flash drive. It was in an evidence bag, zip-locked, labeled with Sharpie for Emery 5. I couldn't breathe for a moment. We evacuated Finch to Mason Ridge. He didn't protest. He seemed relieved, almost surprised we were real. Becca took him to the infirmary and gave him water, wrapped him in a blanket, then posted a watch just outside the door. It wasn't to guard against Finch. It was for what might have followed. I returned to Stratton once more with Pennywell and McKay. We retrieved the ship's logs, the engine data recorder, a few sealed water containers, and the last of the fuel. No signs of infection, no fresh blood. But below deck, beyond the engineering bay, the air changed. Thick, still, like the metal itself was holding back breath. We didn't push further. Sometimes knowing is enough. Sometimes it's not worth what you have to lose. Back aboard the Mason Ridge, I locked myself in the comms cabin and inserted the flash drive. There were 3 files, 2 corrupted, 1 playable. It was a video, grainy, low resolution, lit by a flashlight held in Devin's hand. He looked tired, unshaven, older than I remembered. Behind him was a bulkhead with peeling labels and a Coast Guard seal. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "Emery, if you're seeing this, it means someone got my signal. I hope to hell it's you. I hope Mason Ridge made it. I hope you're still you." He paused, rubbed his eyes. We made it to the islands. We kept order for a while. Then things changed. The infection didn't just spread on land. It hit the coastlines, fishing villages. Then it jumped boats. We took in a raft. One man claimed to be clean. He wasn't. Half my crew went down in 48 hours. We locked the lower decks. Some begged. Some didn't even realize they'd turned. He looked down, then back at the camera. I couldn't keep them alive. I tried. We ran. We drifted. I left the raft, the decoys, the messages. I thought maybe someone would come. I thought maybe you'd come. He tapped the camera. "I'm going below. I have to know who's left. I won't come back up. Not if there's nothing left to bring. If you get this, don't follow. There's nothing down there for you." He smiled softly, like he did when he beat me at cards, but didn't want to rub it in. "Stay afloat, Emery. That ship, she kept you alive. Don't let her down." Then the screen went black. I don't remember shutting off the monitor. I sat there for what felt like hours. The walls creaked, the fans buzzed. Outside, the sea kept moving like it always had. But I didn't, not for a while. Eventually, I walked to the stern of the Mason Ridge, looked out across the black water where the Stratton drifted behind us. A white shadow in the dusk, still silent, watching. We couldn't tow her. We didn't have the power. I couldn't sink her. That felt wrong, so we left her there. That night, I sat with Finch. He drank warm broth in silence, then handed me a small journal. Inside were Devin's final notes, scribbles, map sketches, radio logs. Some entries made no sense. Others were crystal clear. One page was dated nearly 2 months after I thought he'd gone dark. It read, "Mason Ridge is out there. I know it. If not him, then someone. If anyone finds this, tell him I didn't stop fighting." I closed the journal and placed it in my footlocker. The next morning, we resumed the course. Not back to Bastion. Not yet. There was still more coast to sweep, more signals to chase. But something had shifted in all of us. Devin had left a breadcrumb trail across the sea. I had followed it to its end. The Stratton was behind us now, adrift and silent, fading with the haze. But her shadow stayed with me, not in grief, not even guilt, just the weight of understanding. We weren't ghosts anymore, circling the world, waiting to disappear. We were moving. We were signal. We had become the message. I adjusted our heading northwest, bringing us closer to the Central American coastline, Honduras, Guatemala. The waters here were tighter, the islands closer, and radio chatter, once nothing but static, was starting to flare again. Not coordinated, not clear. But it was there, bleeding through the dark, fragmented. A call sign, a scream, a number station. Someone forgot to turn off. It felt like passing through a graveyard where the grave still whispered. 3 days after leaving the Stratton's last drift, Pennywell picked up a triple ping on the emergency maritime channel. We traced it to a cluster of reef islets north of Punta Gorda. The signature was weak, bouncing, like it had been repeating for days. The code was military, but modified, encrypted with an old-style key most US systems had phased out years ago. Becca ran it through a cracked Navy database we'd pieced together with help from Bastion. It translated to a simple sentence: hostile boarding survivor team requesting extraction. We'd heard codes like that before. Most of the time, they led to rusted wrecks or bait setups, but something in the signal told me it wasn't a trap. The way the loop reset, the delay between each ping, it was being monitored. Someone was alive. I gave the order to investigate. We ran a slow approach, cutting engines half a mile out. The islets were jagged limestone spits barely above sea level, overgrown with mangroves, and wrapped in abandoned netting from what had once been a shrimping outpost. Through binoculars, we spotted what looked like an overturned landing craft wedged between two boulders. Smoke trickled from one side. Pennywell scanned the frequency again. Same loop, slightly louder. I didn't send the full team ashore, just McKay, Sung, and Lieutenant Hart, one of our quieter but sharper bridge crew who had volunteered for ground runs since the beginning. They moved in with caution, M4s at low ready, gas masks slung but unused. No movement greeted them, no infected, just wind and the sound of water slapping at driftwood. 10 minutes in, McKay called it. 2 survivors, 1 male, 1 female, both in fatigues. Too clean to be from the field. IDs identified them as part of a private security outfit once stationed in Panama before the collapse. Their story, told through dry lips and trembling hands, was messy, but mostly coherent. They'd been part of a convoy attempting to extract diplomatic personnel from Colon. When the convoy was ambushed, their boat had broken off during a retreat under fire. They'd been marooned here for over a month. They claimed there were 6 of them to start, now just 2. We brought them aboard. Medical protocol held. Dario, the Bastion medic who joined our crew before we left, ran the scans. Both passed, but both were emaciated, dehydrated, and visibly affected by isolation. The woman, Shay, kept twitching at movement that wasn't there. The man, Larson, refused to sleep unless someone stood watch at the door. They hadn't just survived, they'd unraveled. Still, they were grateful and coherent enough to give us more than just their story. They knew about a place northwest of there, beyond the reefs near the Biz Shelf. Len claimed there was a signal tower, repurposed from an old weather monitoring station, broadcasting shortwave updates, not from survivors, but from automated servers tied to orbital feeds, military grade, still running. That got my attention. The idea that anything tied to satellite infrastructure was still active was hard to believe, but even a long dead heartbeat was worth chasing. We altered course once again. The seas turned against us the next day. Heavy swells rolled from the north. Wind came hard off the mainland, pressing us south. 2 hours after dawn, the storm found us. no lightning, but the kind of churn that tossed the ship like driftwood. The Mason Ridge wasn't new. Every weld, every patch, every cable rigged by hand started to groan in unison. We shut down one of the forward engines to keep from tearing a coolant line. Down below, Dario secured the 2 new survivors in the infirmary while Hart and Sung roped down the stores in case of sudden roll. Somewhere during the chaos, Pennywell came running onto the bridge with a printout. The signal was real. The frequency Len described had activated. Short bursts, not voice, not Morse. Data, raw, encrypted, but undeniably live. We stabilized just before dusk and rode the outer edge of the storm through the night. The deck was soaked. One of the radar units shorted, and the hydroponic patch cracked a gutter, spilling filtered water across Deck 3. McKay worked all night rebuilding it with Becca, and 2 of the teenagers, who now knew enough about water flow and filtration systems to hold their own in most engineering conversations. We made visual contact with the tower the next morning. It stood alone on a rusted pier half swallowed by mangroves tilted 10 degrees southward. 2 solar arrays shimmered in the mist, coated in algae, but still turning with the light. The structure itself had clearly been reinforced. Steel supports, cables, netting, and a flag. A black flag. Not a banner, but a signal. A scrap of tarp twisted into a long shape, waving in the wind like a warning. We approached slowly. The tower showed no movement, no smoke, but the signal was still active. Hard McKay and I boarded with full containment gear. The air near the dock was thick with rot and mangrove bloom. A small dinghy floated nearby. Its hull is crusted with barnacles and blood, not fresh. Inside the base of the tower, we found 3 corpses, desiccated, unturned, likely dead from dehydration or wounds. They were sealed in a room rigged with plastic sheeting and duct tape. Someone had tried to hold a quarantine. Failed. Upstairs, we found the server core. The thing was cobbled together from a dozen different systems. NOAA weather units, military field relays, even parts of what looked like a ham radio shack. It had been built to gather data from whatever satellites remained, crunch it, and transmit basic survival updates, storm patterns, ocean currents, radiation warnings. The feed was minimal, but current. Somehow, the server still had uplink, likely bouncing through a relay somewhere in orbit that hadn't yet decayed. They'd locked onto 2 NOAA polar orbiters, whose attitude control still cycled autonomously, enough to dump raw data a few times a day. McKay pulled the data with a portable SSD. Hart rigged the tower to begin a passive relay of our own Mason Ridge broadcast. If anyone passed within range, they'd hear us, our name, our heading, our promise. We left the dead where they lay. Sometimes burial is less about dirt and more about silence. The return trip to open water felt different. Not lighter, but more complete, like we'd inherited something. That server had been someone's final act. One last finger on the switch before time caught up with them. We didn't just collect their data, we took their post. The next few days blurred, no storms, just heat and steady waves. We ran west for a while, chasing the boundary of known traffic zones. Once a flare rose over the horizon, green, then red. We approached carefully. It was a lifeboat, empty, slashed open from within. We didn't stop. By then, most of the crew knew not to ask why. Some still wanted to believe every signal meant life, but lifeboats floating half submerged under a silent sky. Those weren't flares of hope. They were relics, warnings. Open graves left adrift by hands that had already gone under. The next transmission was different. The man's voice was too ragged to be a trap, too broken to fake. Pennywell played it twice to be sure. Then again, it looped in 23-second bursts. Short range, panicked. Coordinates marked a position along the edge of a reef channel off the coast of Bisay near Banco Chinuro, where the seabed rose dangerously close to the surface. The voice repeated one thing clearly: civilian barge under attack. Fuel aboard. Survivors trapped. No call sign. No background noise, except static. Just the kind of desperation that strips a man to his purpose. We changed course. Approaching the reef required patience. Bo plotted a zigzagging path through the shores where depth soundings flickered between 9 meters and 0 in the span of a 100-yard. We couldn't risk grounding the Mason Ridge on coral. I sent out a Zodiac with Becca Hart and McKay, while we waited offshore, drifting in deeper water with sonar passive. They reached visual range after 30 minutes and reported what we feared: a civilian supply barge wedged against the reef, low in the water, but intact. It was anchored with makeshift ropes. The bow battered against the coral by the current. Smoke rose from the aft section. Through binoculars, Hart spotted at least 3 people waving from the top deck. 1 adult, 2 teens. Then he saw movement on the far side. A skiff painted black, light aluminum hull, equipped with a .50 caliber mount bolted crudely to the bow. It drifted around the barge, circling like a shark. Pirates. They weren't dressed in anything resembling a uniform, just ragged clothes, masks, and wraps for sun and salt. One held a long-barreled hunting rifle. Another had a crowbar. They didn't open fire. They weren't there to sink the barge. They were waiting to take it. It was a standoff, and we had a choice. Standard Navy rules of engagement meant nothing now. The Mason Ridge wasn't part of a task force. There were no carrier groups, no resupply from Florida. If we fired, we risked everything. But if we didn't, 3 civilians would be lost, and possibly more if those pirates had a base nearby. I authorized the approach. We moved in slow, visible, deliberate. Becca and Hart were already in position on the far side of the barge with long rifles aimed low, not to kill, just to show force. I opened the hailing channel and transmitted a warning in English, Spanish, and Creole. This is Lieutenant Commander Emery Vance of the USS Mason Ridge, an armed U.S. Navy vessel. You are approaching a protected civilian craft. Withdraw immediately. They didn't respond on the radio, but they turned the skiff, not away, toward us. That's when the gunfire started. They weren't professionals. First shots went wide. A round ricocheted off the barge's hull. Hart fired once low, hit the skiff's bow near the waterline. It staggered. Then Becca took out the gunner's mount with a single shot through the feed bracket. The pirates turned tail. The skiff limped northward, smoke trailing from the engine casing. We didn't pursue, not because we couldn't, but because this wasn't a battlefield. It was a warning. We pulled alongside the barge and boarded with full containment. The survivors, an older man named Bayo and 2 kids named Les and Marie, had been hiding inside a gutted refrigeration unit for nearly 2 days. Bio had broken ribs. Les had a leg wound stitched with a fishing line. Mari hadn't spoken in over 48 hours. Dario met them at the Zodiac ramp. No signs of infection, just dehydration and exhaustion. Their story wasn't complicated. They'd fled the mainland from Dangria after their camp was overrun. The barge belonged to a relief group, NGO funded, turned freelance aid ship after everything fell apart. Most of their people had been left behind or killed. Bio had tried to sail north, hoping to reach Cumel. Instead, he hit the reef and got stuck. The pirates had found them 2 days later, circling like they were hunting animals. We recovered 10 sealed fuel drums from the barge. 10 drums, about 3 days slow steam if we kept one turbine dark, enough to stretch our range by another 100 nautical miles. We logged their location on the map, then towed the barge free with a winch line before scuttling it at sea. I logged the coordinates in the ship's terminal in case anyone asked why. We hadn't become a warship again, but we had teeth. And there was a line now. You prey on the weak, you cross it. We wouldn't chase you, but if you found us again, you wouldn't walk away. The kids didn't speak much at first. Mari kept her eyes on the floor. Les asked once if we had ice, not for his leg, just to chew. I gave him my last bag from the med locker. He nodded like that meant something bigger than words. Dario and Hart took turns sitting with them during night watch. No one asked why. We'd all seen what children looked like when they broke. These two hadn't yet. That mattered. The next few nights were quiet. Open sea again. McKay installed a backup solar panel rig on the stern angled to catch dawn light. Sun used old rubber sealant to patch a leak under the desalination tank. Pennywell kept chasing signals, but said little. I knew what that meant. He'd heard something and didn't want to spook us. He handed me the coordinates just before lights out on day 4, scribbled on a slip of recycled map paper, barely legible. It matched what he'd shown me earlier, but this time, the signal was stronger, more consistent. The same word repeating on the narrow band every 90 minutes. Remnant, no metadata, no timestamp, just the identifier. The location put it 70 minutes off the coast of Cosmo, where no oil rigs had operated in years. I checked the NOAA archives. Closest charted structure was a former Weather Buoy maintenance platform decommissioned in 2015. Nothing else in that stretch but open sea and reef. We'd followed weaker signals before. This one felt deliberate. I called a meeting in the mess, laid out the coordinates on the chart table. 26 souls now lived on the Mason Ridge. Some new, some from Norfolk. I didn't frame it as a mission. I told them what we had. An unknown signal, probably from old US hardware in a part of the Caribbean now ruled by tides and scavengers. Going there could mean more survivors, could mean a trap, could mean nothing at all. No one objected. We set a course before dawn. The sea remained calm for most of the day. The cloud cover stayed thin. A light breeze rolled in from the south, cool and carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet formed. The radar didn't show anything. Passive sonar was quiet. Even the wind turbines jerry-rigged to deck mounts last month spun without protection. We approached the coordinates slowly. Instruments tracking depth every 100 mir. The water here dropped off fast, black beneath the hull. Visibility fell to less than 15 feet. Not a single buoy, no surface platform, no visible rigging, just open sea and low mist on the horizon. Then Pennywell saw it on 4, cold signature, irregular structure, floating low. We closed within 2 nautical miles and cut engines. The shape emerged from the haze like a myth, a platform, not steel, at least not all of it. It looked like a hull section welded to the remnants of an offshore tower. Solar panels stitched together with scaffolding, modular walls fashioned from shipping containers and composite slabs. There was no light, no noise, just the gentle creak of waves and steel, and the signal was still repeating. We launched the Zodiac. McKay, Becca, and myself, armed but not raised. We approached the base with caution, engines off, paddling the last 100 meters in silence. A faded flag hung from one side of the tower, stars and stripes bleached white, upside down. Distress, a symbol older than this new world. The docking ramp had been rigged from 2 collapsed catwalks, bound together with steel cable and coated in dry seaweed. No movement, no sentries, just the hum of a wind turbine barely turning in the still air. We climbed aboard. The first thing we saw was the antenna. It had been cobbled together from spare parts, satellite dish guts, ham radio coils, even part of an old military UHF booster. Someone had built it to reach high and wide. At its base, protected by clear panels, was a signal loop station running on a trickle charge from solar and backup batteries. It broadcast nothing but that one word, remnant. The platform wasn't empty. In the main structure, an enclosed shelter made from 2 stacked cargo containers. We found 5 people alive, thin, weary. 2 were former naval comms techs. 1 was a civilian coder from San Diego. The last 2 siblings, barely in their 20s, had been rescued from a cruise ship early in the collapse and hadn't touched land since. They weren't broadcasting for rescue. They were broadcasting for contact. They called it a remnant because that's what it was, the last thread of their former roles. A signal meant not to save, but to remind that someone was still out there, keeping record, still counting days, still watching the horizon for signs of motion. They didn't ask us for food or fuel. They asked what we'd seen, where we'd been, what ports were still smoldering, what waters still swam with the turns. We shared everything. That night, anchored just off the platform, I stood on the stern deck of the Mason Ridge and listened to the quiet click of the signal bouncing from antenna to sky. Not yelling, not screaming, just tapping out the existence of something that had refused to die. Pennywell came up beside me, held out a data sheet, an updated map traced in black marker. It showed routes, pings, settlements, risks, a network, one made not by governments or orders, but by survivors who decided not to go dark. The remnant wasn't a base. It wasn't a safe zone. It was a decision, a choice to stay visible. We left the next morning. The 5 from the platform stayed behind. That was their post. We gave them spare parts, 2 barrels of fuel, and a sealed transmitter they could use to reach us if the signal ever failed. In return, they gave us their maps, their observations, and something harder to describe: purpose. We sailed west. No exact heading this time, just the edge of where the old world ended, and the new one hadn't quite decided what it wanted to be. We broadcast on loop, names, locations, warnings, hope. I rotated the crew on radio duty every 6 hours, making sure the message stayed clean, consistent. If anyone heard us, they'd know. This was not the end. There's a copy of the remnant signal now tucked in our nav hub. Pennywell encrypted it with the ship's legacy key and titled it Mason Ridge Standard. Becca wrote it in marker on the door of the comms bay. Below it, someone else added 3 words. We are afloat. We're still out here. If you're listening, hold course. Stay moving. Stay signal. The sea is wide, but not empty.